Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to share the top books from 2020 that I found the most interesting, insightful, and just plain entertaining. I always like watching these types of videos because I'm always on the lookout for a new book to read. So hopefully some of these books you'll find interesting as well and be able to add to your to-read list. And definitely share in the comments below your favorite books of 2020. I'm sure I'd be super interested in the books that you've been reading as well as other people in the comments. So let us know down below what you've been reading this year. So I'm going to go through a list of my favorite non-fiction books in the first half of the video, and then some of my favorite fiction books in the second half of the video. So I've left timestamps in the description in case you're interested in one category over the other, or if you wanted to jump to a specific book. So surprisingly, my number one favorite book of 2020 was Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. Now, I'm not usually the type to read books by celebrities because I'm not that basic, right? But actually it was a super interesting, entertaining, and inspiring read, and I highly recommend it. Matthew McConaughey is unashamedly my favorite actor, and I wasn't really expecting what I got out of the book, which is basically his memoirs of his life as an actor and even before that as a child. He came from like a totally different background to what I expected. He came from a kind of a blue collar working family in the US. He spent some time in Australia, which was kind of cool, after he finished high school as an exchange student. And then he sort of goes into his journey as an actor and how his career developed. And it's just so well written. It's got some hilarious stories, including one when he got high and got arrested and dragged down the street naked by police, which was actually hilarious. I think the key thing I took away from this book was the whole concept of green lights, which is in the title. And so Matthew McConaughey explains that he sees opportunities that lead somewhere as green lights and opportunities that lead nowhere as red lights. And so his life is a series of green lights that have led him to where he is today. And I think it's actually a really cool philosophy and a good way to live, in the sense of take whatever opportunities come your way, the unique opportunities that come to you in your own life, whatever that may be. For Matthew McConaughey, that was obviously acting, but for someone else it might be something totally different. But if you don't take that opportunity, if you don't go through that green light in life, then you'll never know where it leads, or whether it leads to success or whether it leads to a dead end. You'll never know unless you actually take it. And that's something that I really try to follow in my own life, which is to just make the most of opportunities that come your way. For me, some have really worked out and some have just gone nowhere. And I really like how he also talks about how you should try and create some of your own green lights. If you're not necessarily getting where you want in life, then sometimes it's a matter of you getting out there and creating a green life, creating an opportunity rather than waiting for something to come your way. And that's something that I've found to be really true in my own life. And it made me really actually reconsider 2021 and where I want my life to be leading and what I want to be doing with my time next year. But other than that, it's a really interesting book about his life, his success, his failures, and it's just a plain, fun and entertaining read. He's got some really great storytelling in there. If you get the Audible version like I did, Matthew reads it himself, and so that makes it 10 times better just because it's Matthew McConaughey. So I highly recommend this book if you're looking for something a bit different, something really fun, entertaining and funny that will make you laugh out loud, as it did me multiple times, but something with a bit of inspiration mixed in. So my second favorite book of the year was something totally different, which was The Fall and Rise of China by Richard Baum. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's basically an overview of Chinese history from the last 200 or so years. And I found it absolutely fascinating. It was such an interesting read. I've always wanted to learn more about Chinese history, but I never really looked into it or spent the time. And I've had a lot of questions about China, especially as it's a sort of a rising superpower in the world. And I've always wondered how it seems to be so capitalistic, but at the same time it's quite socialist. But all these questions and much more were answered because it just gives so much context, background and detail into how China has arrived at where it is today. It goes through all the disruptions in power in China, from the early 1800s to the fall of the Confucianist dynasties, all the way up to the early 1900s when Chairman Mao rose to power and the Communist Party rose to power, and how that really miserably failed, and that led to shifts in power after Mao died, and they began to open up as a country and become more capitalistic. I think a couple of the key takeaways for me from this book were the fact that power structures and governments really are man-made. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I think in my head I've always sort of seen governments, particularly Western democracies, as something really stable and sort of a part of the fabric of reality almost. Like it's always going to be there, it always has been there. But in reality, this book really made me think about the fact that actually Western democracy is something finite. It was created by people, and it will probably eventually someday end and be surpassed by something else, which in a weird kind of way makes me kind of feel a bit freer as a human being. Like I'm not so locked into a system of reality. Like I feel like I can be a little bit more human and just be myself a bit more, because I'm not necessarily connected and attached to society in the same way that I always thought I was. And if that's a little bit abstract for you, the other main takeaway for me was insight into how countries like the United States, England, and Australia all relate to China today. I've definitely noticed in the last few years there's a lot of tension that's been building between these countries, and I think the author really points out quite well that a lot of it really is just suspicion of each other. As has happened before in history, as a new superpower rises, the existing superpowers become suspicious and a little bit nervous about the intentions of the rising one. But I think the key thing is that the book pointed out was that China really hasn't showed any ill intentions towards the existing superpowers. It hasn't shown intentions of being out to get us, but there's just a lot of natural suspicion arising as China becomes more powerful. And so I think that's given me a bit of peace and helps me to relax a bit about the state of the world, and makes me a bit more hopeful, I guess, about the future of the world and where everything's headed. And so even though this is a history book, it's really engaging. The author did a really great job of writing it. He includes quite a few of his own personal stories of him traveling to China and meeting key political figures, and they all relate to the history that he's talking about in that chapter or that lecture, which helps to make it even more relatable. So it is by no means a dry read, it's actually really engaging. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested in the ideas of socialism and communism versus capitalism, if you're interested in history at all, or if you're just interested in having a better understanding of the state of current politics in the world and where China is on the world stage. So the next book on my list was Show Your Work by Austen Kleon. Now this is a really great book that you might have heard of before if you're interested in YouTube and that sort of thing, because it's basically about how you should share your work in progress online in the 21st century. And the idea being that you're going to attract other like-minded people into your sort of world and community, and that's going to help you grow as a person, as well as provide you with really cool opportunities and help develop your work into something even better. The key sort of theme throughout the book is that you don't have to become a master before you start to share your work online. The idea is that you should share your journey towards becoming a master or becoming more of a professional from when you're a beginner. And again, the idea being that as you share your more amateur work, you'll be able to get more feedback that will help you develop. You'll be able to attract other people who are interested that will help you develop, and it will help keep you accountable to your work. And I found this to be really true even so far on my short, brief, small journey with YouTube, in that continually putting myself out there a bit has really helped to develop my skills in terms of like editing and video and that kind of thing, even though it's still very basic. And already I've had some really cool opportunities that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't put my work out there. So I definitely recommend this book if you're artistic at all and you're interested in getting your work out there. I'd recommend it if you're interested in growing like an online business or something like a YouTube channel, or if you're just wanting to create some more green lights in your life, as Matthew McConaughey would say. So my next favorite book of 2020 was Atomic Habits by James Clear, and you may have already read it. I know a lot of people read it this year, and it's a really great book. And I think it's best summed up by the quote, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And the book basically talks about the idea that having goals is really great, but if you don't have a solid system to achieve that goal, then you're probably never going to get to that goal. And I've talked about this sort of idea a bit in my channel before, but I really love that idea and I really resonated with it, and I find it to be very true in the sense that you have to have a plan of where you want to get to, otherwise you'll probably end up finding yourself just drifting through life and you won't necessarily achieve what you want to achieve. And of course, being more intentional about getting somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get somewhere, but increases your chances a lot. And I think it goes back to the idea that I really love of an aircraft flying through the air. If it changes its course by just 1 degree, you won't even notice it in that moment. But after several hours of flying, you're going to be somewhere completely different to where you were originally headed. And again, I found this to be really true in my own life. Really small changes every single day, like imperceptible changes, like you can hardly even notice a difference, eventually down the track lead to quite drastic differences. Even in my own investing journey, for example, probably like 5 years ago, I began to take investing a bit more seriously. And all it really was back then was listening to some more podcasts and reading some more books. So on the surface, you could hardly even tell the difference in my life. I didn't suddenly make $1 million overnight. I just added some books and podcasts to my daily routine, and now 5 years later I'm making some pretty good returns in the stock market. But I would never be here if I hadn't made those really small changes way back 5 years ago. So if you're looking for a book to help you sort of steer yourself towards some life goals that you have, or you just wanting to create some new habits, highly recommend Atomic Habits. It's a great book. Now the next book on the list was another one that really made me reconsider how I see society and how I view things, and that was Utopia for Realists and How We Can Get There by Rutger Bregman. Now in the book, Bregman talks about a few different ideas that he thinks could really help benefit us socially as a society. And these include ideas like a 15-hour work week, open borders, and most intriguingly for me, universal basic income. I know that's a fairly controversial topic depending on who you talk to. Some people are really for it, some people are really against it. And I was sort of center right, if you will, on the topic, in the sense that I've always sort of grown up with the idea that hard work is where it's at, and that's how you get anywhere in life. If you don't work hard, it's your own fault, and freebies and handouts are an unhealthy thing for society for the most part. But this book really made me think twice about that sort of philosophy, and it showed that there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that a universal basic income where people wouldn't have to worry about the basic necessities in life could actually be really beneficial for our society. I think a lot of people tend to think that if people earned a basic income, they just spend all their time smoking drugs, being lazy, and doing nothing with their time. But in fact, again, evidence seems to suggest that when people earn a basic income for free, they tend to do really constructive things with their time and invest in things that really benefit society as a whole. And it can even be argued, in fact, that for sort of lower socioeconomic groups, there's so much pressure on them to earn a living that they become a bit desperate, and that's when they turn to things like drugs and crime. So I think there were a couple of key takeaways for me from the book. One was, don't look down upon people who are in lower socioeconomic groups than I am, just because they're poorer than I am. There's often actually a lot more to the story than meets the eye. And the other takeaway for me was to be more open to new ideas of improving society. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested in those sorts of ideas. It's a very engaging read with lots of really great evidence. And last but not least, on my non-fiction, favorite books of 2020 was The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Now this year has been really challenging for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but what Ryan talks about in the book is that often the difficult path is the path that you need to go down to get where you want to be. And I think most of us kind of instinctually understand that doing the hard thing is often the right thing, or will lead you to where you want to be. But I think our sort of culture often prefers comfort and ease over doing the hard thing. And so this book, just for me, was a really good reminder to get outside your comfort zone and push the boundaries a bit more. Not to always just fall back into comfort and ease, because that's what I tend to do definitely most of the time, but to really get outside my comfort zone and face the hard things in life. Don't run away from them, but to walk through them, and that's where you'll probably get to where you really want to be in life. So I highly recommend this book if there's things in your life that you know you need to do, but they're hard. It's a really great reminder and inspiration, using stories from all sorts of people throughout history, that doing the hard thing is often the right way to go. So now I have 3 fiction books that I really enjoyed over the past year, and to be fair, I don't really read a lot of fiction. I usually just read it to break up the amount of history and self-help and business books that I like to read, but there were definitely a few standouts for 2020. And the first one this year, which I finally decided to read, was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now I've put it off for a long time. It's sort of been on my list because it's a classic and I want to read a lot of the classics, but I've always thought, it's going to be boring, it's going to be girly. Now I have seen the movies, and I did like the movies, like they were pretty good, but definitely not my typical cup of tea. I'd rather watch something a bit more actiony or more of a thriller. But the book itself was actually really good. It was really well written, which I guess is unsurprising considering it's very well known and very famous, but it was really engaging. Some parts were actually really funny, made me laugh out loud, which I was surprised at. And Jane Austen definitely knows how to create really interesting and believable characters. And so I'm glad I finally read the story. You probably don't need me to tell you sort of outline of what happens, because most people already know it. I've already seen the movies, but I definitely recommend it if you've already seen the movies and you enjoyed them, or if you're going through the classics and you just read a really dry, boring one, give Pride and Prejudice a try, because it's actually really interesting and a fun read. The next book that I really enjoyed was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Now, I've never read an Agatha Christie book before, and it wasn't really on my radar until a friend of mine read the same book and he said it was actually pretty good. So I thought I'd give it a try, because why not? And he was right. It was actually a really interesting, fun read. Basically, it's the story of these 10 strangers who go to an island for a holiday. Who knows why you go to an island for a holiday with 10 strangers, but anyway, they all go to this island and then they begin to mysteriously die or get killed, one after the other. And it's all sort of in accordance with this poem that was on the wall in the mansion that they're all staying at. And so the whole time in the book, you're trying to figure out who's the guy who's killing them all, who's the girl who's killing them all, because they decide that it's one of them. There's no one else on the island. And to be honest, there was some parts where I was reading in bed at night and I actually kind of had to put it down because it was actually giving me the creeps. And I'd say that's a really big compliment, because if it's creeping you out that much that you don't want to read it at night in bed, it's probably a really engaging read. It's one of the original whodunit murder mysteries, I think, as far as I know. And you can definitely see how it's influenced sort of more popular, I don't know, cultural murder mystery type stuff. Even like Knives Out, you can see how Knives Out took some influence from Agatha Christie. Board games like Cluedo, you can definitely see the relation there. And even though it was a little bit hard to follow at times, some of the names and characters got a little bit blurred for me, it was still a really fun, really interesting and engaging read. Kept me on the edge of my seat and kept me wanting to turn the pages, so that's always a good thing. And I highly recommend it for anyone who's into murder mysteries or just looking for something a bit different and exciting. I wasn't able to figure out who the killer was until the end of the book when they reveal. So if you figure it out before me, then you're doing amazing. And the last book on my favorites list for 2020 in terms of fiction is a bit of a bonus book. I won't go into detail on it here because I did a whole other video on it, which you can watch. But that was Animal Farm by George Orwell. Basically an allegory for Soviet Russia, and I did find it really interesting. So if you're interested in hearing a bit more about that, go and watch my Animal Farm video on that. So there you go. I hope some of those books you found intriguing and you can add them to your to-read list. If you're interested in more videos on reading, I've done quite a few of them. Check out my reading playlist. And again, don't forget, share your recommendations of your favorite books of 2020 in the comments. I'd be super keen. I'm sure other people will be super keen to see them as well. Other than that, have a great week and I'll see you in the next video.